Committee Chair Beltucci, you are live.
Thank you. I'd like to call the Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting to order, and I would ask Rachel to call the roll.
Yes, good morning. Chair Balducci,
Here.
Regent Santiago. Absence is noted. Regent Stewart. Absence is noted. Regent Yang
Here.
and Chairman Gui.
Present.
Thank you. Welcome to our ex officios on the line, Charlene Casamento and Professor Cunningham, our CFOs and Chancellor Chang. Chair Balducci, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Rachel. The first item we have before us is approval of the October 7th Finance Committee meeting. I would make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Chad, any comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed?
Aye.
Meeting minutes are accepted. The other is the October 17th meeting of the Finance Committee meeting. I would make a motion that we accept those minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, any comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Those minutes are approved also. We have now an information item dealing with the Board of Regents Finance Committee preparation calendar. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. For those of you here in the room, you have a printout of the calendar. My apologies for those on the in the meeting virtually. I'm going to try to share my screen. And that is the calendar that I'm going to refer to. You might need to maximize it on your end, because if I maximize it on my end, less will be shown on the screen. So what you see in front of you is a meeting schedule that we're going to use to prepare for each of our board committee meetings. And the reason we are doing this is because the board has expressed a wish to be involved in decision-making earlier in the process, so that there isn't a feeling that the work was all done, decisions were all made, and all we're looking for is a rubber stamping at the committee meeting and eventually the board. What we want is real engagement by members of the board, so that by the time we get to a committee, all relevant members have been well informed and can vote in an informed manner. So what you'll see at the top of this spreadsheet are kind of the standing items for each month of the year. So for any given year. So the very first line shows the standing item for BOR approval. You'll see that in February, every February, we seek approval for the mid-year update of the current fiscal year spending plan. You'll see that in June, every June, you approve the fiscal year spending plan for the fiscal year that begins July 1 in any given year. You'll see on that line a standing item in August. This is a new standing item. We were questioning whether we were to have you approve our requests, both the current services submission to OPM and the policy option submission to OPM, made September 1 and October 1 respectively. We wanted to make sure that we built in the approval process for those requests early enough to get this, at least that first submission, in by September 1. So we are making the approval of the operating and capital request a standing item for the August committee and board meetings. And finally, you'll see all the way to the right in December on that first line, tuition and fees. This is the meeting that we're in for this year, where we will seek approvals for whatever fees and increases we might seek approvals for, recognizing this year and in this meeting, we are not seeking approval for increasing tuition, but just for a couple of fees, and we'll get to that later in the meeting. The next standing item for board information are the accountability reports, the enrollment reports, and you'll see in May a capital program review. This is a new item that will allow us to incorporate the region's feedback on our capital improvement program. That includes both capital improvement items for facilities as well as capital improvement items for our information technology. So I have Keith Epstein here, the Vice President for Facilities and Real Estate, in case you have questions about that capital review. But we are suggesting that that be done every May so that you have that information in advance of approving the spending plan and in advance of the fall request that you would approve in August. And then the next couple of items show the calendar for specific shared governance activities. And then that last line is the state funding process, just to give you some context of what the state is doing and how what we are doing aligns with the state's approval process. So clearly the governor will release his budget and submit his budget to the General Assembly in January. February is when the legislative session begins, and it will end sometime in June. And then we begin considering the next fiscal year. So you'll see in the shared governance line, I've incorporated in February and March legislative strategy meetings. I've incorporated in April budget formulation meetings. This would be our engagement with the institutions on their development of their fiscal year budget. And then in May, we are proposing to hold budget hearings where the institutions would present to the chancellor what they are planning to do for the current year and the funds they would be asking for the coming year. And so you'll see, if you look further to the right, November and December, further legislative strategy meetings in advance of session that begins at the beginning of the year.
Excuse me, CFO Blanchard, could you slide your the actual spreadsheet over to the right so the virtual participants can see the rest of the calendar? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. My apologies. So I'm sliding over so you can see the July through December items. And you'll see the operating and capital request as a standing approval item in August. You'll see a completions report, which will be an informational item in August. You'll see in September is the deadline for submitting our current services submission to OPM. And that will be approved in August with the operating and capital request. And in October, you'll see the accountability report, the enrollment report. And you'll see number 1, number 2, and number 3 by those. You'll see 3 accountability reports. So it'll be number 1, number 2, and number 3 throughout the year. You'll see 2 enrollment reports. One enrollment report will be for the fall semester. 1 enrollment report will be for the spring semester. And then after the spring semester, you'll see a completions report. And I believe we've got the completions there in August. And then you'll see the other items for November and December. Everything below those top 5 lines is a calendar that helps my staff understand what we need to have done by date certain so that we can get information to the board, so the board can provide us with feedback. So why don't we focus on lines 11 through 19. And in line 11, it says number 1 is to develop the draft staff. So about a month in advance of every board meeting, we are going to begin developing the relevant staff report for that board meeting. And then we're going to socialize, number 2, we're going to socialize that staff report with the committee. This is where we get your feedback. And we're creating about 4 or 5 days for your feedback. Once you give that feedback to us, number 3, we will revise the draft staff report based on that feedback. And the feedback, we will also seek feedback from our faculty partners and our student partners in their relevant board governance structures. Once we revise the staff report, we'll take a couple of days to do that. And then we will send a final staff report back out to the committee, which is really where the process started previously. Right? Previously, we were sending you a final document and you guys were saying, hey, wait a minute. And so what we've done is incorporate that 1, 2, and 3 in advance of number 4. so that by the time we get to number 5, in advance of this committee meeting, and every committee meeting like it, I'm going to hold, the committee meeting is usually on Wednesday. I'm going to hold office hours on Monday and Tuesday afternoon to receive your phone calls and your questions, so that by the time we get to the committee meeting, with all of the process I've just described and that opportunity for my office hours, the intent is for you to be fully informed in advance of making a vote on Wednesday, a vote that you would propose to the full board. So number 6 is the committee meeting. After the committee meeting, we will send the staff report to the full board so that the full board has a chance to review the materials in advance of the board meeting. And similarly, number 8, I will hold office hours on the Monday and Tuesday of the week in advance of a board meeting on Thursdays. Okay, so what we are trying to do with this process is incorporate as much time as we can for your feedback, so that we make sure that by the time we get to the actual meetings and actual votes, regents are fully informed.
And that implies to all the committees. As you look down, you look at Ted's committee on technology, and we move down through audits and human resources, and et cetera, et cetera.
So I've not incorporated all of the committees, but mainly the administrative
Right.
committees that I my staff would support those committees. So
Right.
the HR administration will be supported by the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources and Labor Relations. The Technology Committee will be supported by our new CIO. The Audit Committee will be supported by our new controller. Yes, we have a new controller. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to take your questions about this process.
So I've got a couple different questions, Lloyd. So the first is really just informational. I'm trying to understand this, right? So in the February-March strategy meetings, so lines 4 and lines 5, right? So some of those are for this committee, some of those are for just shared governance in general, right? That is for the budget as of which fiscal year? That's for the next year's budget, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
Okay. So that means this, like in terms of what's already happened this year, right? Are we going to have those meetings?
So I'm
What happened?
scrolling.
My question is because when legislative session is running, it's clearly talking about future budget, right?
Actually, when the legislative session is running, they are talking about the future budget. So what they pass in the spring is effectuated in July, starting on July 1.
Right.
To the extent that that's the future, yes.
Right. So in other words, so then this is the general question, right? Like, what happens this year? Because if we adopt this process, how are we onboarding into this process, given that this didn't happen, right? Like, obviously, March 2024, February 2024, April 24 was missed. So how are we going to get bootstrapped up this fiscal year for this year's legislative session?
So you will see on the screen, Regent Yang, that I am showing the July through December months. And in November and December, row 4, the shared governance row, shows the same legislative strategy. So if we had adopted this process early enough, we would be having those conversations now. Now, I will say that we are having those conversations now, to the extent that the Chancellor works with you, Chairman Guay, Chairman Balducci, and other members of the Board of Regents. We are having conversations about what we want to see and who we want to engage in the General Assembly during session. That will start here in the next 30 days or so, well, 60 days.
Okay. So that's really my question, is that will start in a more formal sense soon. Okay.
So the idea is for these November and December sessions, strategy sessions, to engage our community, both the board members as well as our faculty and unions, to say, hey, how do we want to address our representatives in the coming session. So we want the November and December meeting to be in advance of the general session that starts in February. And then once we get to, and I'm going to try to scroll back. Once we're in session, we want to have meetings that talk about budget development for the coming year. And then once we get the formulation, that's really an internal process that starts at the universities and the colleges. For example, CT State will be gathering data from their 12 campuses in this process. On April 1, and I think I've listed that here on row 8, on April 1, my office will send out formal guidance to the colleges and universities on what they should think about in terms of their budget formulation for the coming year that starts July 1.
Right. Okay. All right. And then prior to that, we have the row 4, row 5 meetings in March.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. So that's one family of questions. My other family of questions is regarding the operating and capital request. So given that there is a gap in understanding, and I discussed this with Keith yesterday, but just to recap this, Keith, a little bit, our discussion, there is definitely some daylight between what is in existence in terms of plans, master plans, strategic plans, amounts of money spent, not spent, a gap between that, what is in the NCHEMS report, and the understanding of this board of what we have and what we don't have, and to what degree those things exist there. Given that there is daylight there, and given that August has already happened, all right, how do we get caught up, right? And you know, this is not a minor point, right? This is again, the NCHEMS report called out these things for not existing. As per our conversation with Keith, that's not the case. They do exist. Okay, so there's a big gap here. How do we get in sync on all of those items? Again, because we're talking about putting together this process, which does not exist and has not happened in prior years.
So my understanding is that the board resolution calling for a 5-year sustainability plan is the vehicle by which we evaluate what our future spending will look like and how that spending will be sustainable for each of our institutions. So that process will begin in the spring. I believe you set a deadline. You gave us a little extra time, so I believe the deadline is now February 28th for the 5-year sustainability plans. But please recognize, Regent Yang, that in February, we will be talking about the mid-year updates. This is the process that will give the board a chance to review how we're doing in the current fiscal year, FY25.
Right.
And
so
adjustments-
I understand that in terms of operating, and I think we do have a plan now to get in sync. I was speaking more in terms of capital. So specifically, when I said plans, I was referring to master plans, not the 5-year plans.
Okay, so master plans are usually 10-year processes, so it's kind of a different calendar. But certainly we've incorporated here in May a capital program review, if you'll see in line 3. And that capital program review is where we believe is a good time for the board to review our planned capital spending, our master plan as it sits currently, or in that time, whether this year, next year, or the following. But this is the opportunity to review the capital spending in advance of approving the spending plan in June and in advance of making a capital request in August.
Understood. And I think that's fine on an ongoing state. But again, my question is what we're going to do differently this year, given that, again, just to be very blunt about this, it was not known to me that we have master plans for all of our institutions. It was not in the NCHEMS report that we had those things. Okay, so it's not just the board that doesn't know that we have these things. It's also, I guess, OPM and NCHEMS that also don't think we have these things, right? So my point is we cannot wait until May to get in sync on this between ourselves, OPM, NCHEMS, and anybody else who, has a capital concern. And also, and this is also just brings up another point that's missing from this. is the debt and bonding timeline is different than all of this, right? So how does that play into this? But I guess my point is still the same, which is that we cannot wait until May to get in sync on the capital program review. We need to get in sync now, okay, on what we have and what we don't have with regards to our capital requests. I'll remind you that when this was brought up, a couple months ago, and this board did not approve, this committee did not approve the capital request, that one of those reasons was because of the process that was articulated to us by you as to how that happened, right? So again, and if it's just me, it's just me. I don't think so, though. I think other members of this committee also are not in sync as to what we are doing as an institution in terms of what we have for master plans, capital requests, and all of that. And neither, again, are external entities like NCAMS. So what is the plan to get in sync on that?
I do not have a plan to get in sync on that in advance of May, but if the board would like to see a plan, I would suggest that we schedule a special board meeting sometime in the spring, February, March, maybe even January, to review the master plan and that whole capital planning process so that the board is aware of how we plan for capital expenditures. Or we can incorporate that review in the February meeting where we normally would just do the mid-year update.
CFO Blanchard, I believe the Chancellor has his hand raised, and then we have a question from Professor Cunningham.
Thank you, Pam. So, good morning, everybody. So I think, Regent Yang brings up some really good points, right? Is that there seem to be some disconnects or misunderstandings, and obviously we have assets, work is happening, but for whatever reasons, the dots are not connecting. I would hope that there aren't presumptions that we're hiding anything, or that certain things are intentionally being kind of miscommunicated or positioned a certain way. The work is there, it's consistent, but we need to do a better job of making sure it is presented to the board and others at the right times in the right way so that there is clarity. We tried to work closely with NCHEMS during the process. I think there are certain things in the NCHEMS report where, even though it is in the final report, from our perspective, we look at it and we say, well, gosh, clearly, again, a dot just did not connect. So is there a firm process in that? Because we're still, frankly, unpacking the very dense NCHEMS report, but we know what the highlights are and we know some of the primary areas we need to address. This clearly needs to be one of them. So we'll do everything we can to provide the board what it needs in real time, because the work is there. We just don't want there to seem that there is any kind of intention beyond that. This is a very deep dive, as we all know, coming from NCHEMS, and also just given the fact where we are as a system, both administratively and at a campus level. We're doing things that have never been done before, with a board that has never been engaged in this manner before. And I mean that in a good way, right? Like we're developing literally new muscle memory through this activity as we go through it. So whatever the board or this committee might need, we will happily provide that. And then also continue to advance communications with OPM, across the state leadership, and also with any external partners who are doing this work at that time. For instance, we were going back and forth, Charlene Casamento and I, about the note within P20 WIN, right? That was inside the NCHEMS report about data sharing and so forth. Again, from our perspective, that was not necessarily an accurate portrayal. And so I think space to have that conversation and to clarify, which we're creating right now, again, all of us as stakeholders, is a really good thing. And I just don't want the regions to think that we're not engaged in that way. And I also wouldn't want the regions to think that just because something is stated in the NCHEMS report, it is gospel, right? Because there are certainly going to be multiple perspectives to all of this, and we just ask for the balance and the fairness in that space to make sure that we can explicate those situations. So thank you. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor. Just my none of my comments were intended to cast any aspersions on that. That was really the issue, is that we've got it. Let's make sure we are in sync on it and everyone knows it.
Brendan,
Actually,
Marty.
You want?
no, Brendan first.
Brendan and Marty. Yeah. Mr. Chair, you want to call Brendan?
Brendan? Comments?
Thank you. I just have a few comments. I guess I'll start with with an overview of, from my perspective, the conversation so far. I view this as a very positive conversation. I appreciate Regent Yang's ongoing engagement on the issue of transparency and providing information with adequate lead time so that the board and the discussion is a little bit richer, and we might end up with a stronger end product as a result. I did want to follow up on Regent Yang's remarks about the sort of looking backward part of the process. I believe we will have our audited financial statements delivered in December. If prior timelines are determinative. And I didn't see anything about reviewing the audited statements. So I would think that would be something you would want to do somehow, somewhere, because that actually audit results may inform the forward budget. I mean, hopefully there aren't surprises, but you never know. The other remark I wanted to make has to do with the capital budgeting process. I mean, we just need to be real about sort of the benefit cost of putting effort into that, right? So if we look at the track record for baby bonds, right, the legislature passed that and then the rug was pulled on that. And there was a huge fight over that to get it actually funded, right? And so if in the governor's or whoever's process, all of this is just sort of, fictional acting out of, we're going to actually fund things, as I think the track record suggests for capital requests from CSCU, then, we could have the most perfect idealized capital budgeting request that goes forward. And then, we say a lot of nice things about it, but the rug gets pulled and the money never arrives, right? So we have to be real about where we spend our efforts. And if it's not going to yield anything, like, why perfect it? That's my open question I have for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cunningham. Let me address the audit question. You'll see on the January, I've scrolled over to the January month, you'll see down under audit, which starts at row 43, we will have an audit committee meeting on January 14th, where we report the financials and the results of the audits from the previous fiscal year. But thank you for that question. As it relates to capital, back to Regent Yang's question, and I think I'll just stop. I think the chair wanted to respond to Regent Yang.
Well, I don't know. Thank you, CFO Blanchard. I really appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate the visibility and transparency to understand the mechanics of the workflow, the reporting, and the ability to provide input in a timely fashion. So I agree with Professor Cunningham. This is a real clear step in the right direction. I would rewind the tape a bit and go back to our June finance meeting. And I think it was Regent Yang, Regent Santiago with Regent Stewart saying they needed more time. And I think that's where this was borne out. I think the system office has reacted favorably in my mind by putting this together. It's probably not perfect, but I think it's a great operating model for us to work on. As it relates to capital, I think this is a reflection. This is not a comment to be actionable. It's a reflection. I think the system, and we've talked about this, Keith, the system hasn't built a building in 6 years. And I think when we're in the building or rebuilding phase, which we will get to that one day, you have a muscle around capital reporting, and we're really have been in the maintenance phase. Now, I would argue that we need capital dollars to do some significant maintenance on our existing infrastructure. So I think this is a good time to say, yes, we probably need a meeting in the spring to understand where we're at, what's going on, because I've had the privilege to travel around our system to many of our sites. And while we have some really top-notch facilities, we have some other facilities that I would call tired. And we need to get tired to something much better. And we need to ask for money, and we will ask for money, which means we all have to agree, we all have to create a plan. So Regent Yang, thanks for setting the tone here. I would ask CFO Blanchard to host a capital plan overview meeting in February or March for the board and all others. It could be inside of this finance committee. So I think it could be part of this meeting. It makes sense. But what do we really need? Because I think when we've been focused so much on operating expenses and OpEx budgets, we lose sight of the new roof, the new plumbing, the new IT system. And we need to put that on the table for our friends up at the legislature and share with the governor that it costs money to maintain excellence for education, and that's what we're all about. So good discussion, right? A step in the right direction.
Yeah, just a couple quick comments, and I think we have 2 active projects right now. Is that true, Keith?
That's correct.
That's it, 2 active projects. So as far as capital projects go, we have 2 on the board. Let me just make a comment as to, it's been mentioned peripherally. I'd like to make sure we all understand it. The legislature is going to have the final say pretty much as to how we do or what we do. And it goes into session in January and it will end in June. And much of this is going to need to be presented before, not so much the legislature itself, but before the leadership of the Senate and the House, and whether they're both the minority party and the majority party, and the Higher Education Committee, which is going to look at this and say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Now, we have some good comments, and Ted, I think part of that goes back to your comments, which is in a positive step. But we have to take into consideration the legislative process, which is a big piece of this as we move forward. Because we can do whatever we want. If we don't get their approval, school's out, okay? And we're all in trouble. So we want to make sure what we do and how we do it is carefully thought out. Now now the capital program we're talking about here, we can do it in May. Right now it's scheduled for May. Maybe we want to back that up a bit. Just keep in mind, as January begins, the legislative process begins slowly, but because it's the long session. But once they start to rock and roll, we better have our ducks in a row, because they'll either look at it and dismiss it or look at it and carefully approve what we want. So we want to make sure that they're part of what we are doing here today and with the full board meeting. I don't mean to drag that out, but I just think that's an important point for us to have on the table.
Committee Chair Balducci, the Chancellor has his hand raised.
Chancellor?
Thank you, Chair Balducci. I want to make a quick comment, which is we are absolutely ready to rock and roll. We know exactly what the myriad of projects are across the system that are critical to not just student support and healthy, safe working environments that our students, our faculty, and our staff deserve. There are also mission critical health and safety projects that have been on the docket for several years now. So I just want to make sure I state for the record that as of right now, outside of the projects that we've put forward with this current biennium proposal, even before that, this is current state. we have approximately $335 million in approved but never allocated capital funding requests. So I'll repeat that, $335 million that was approved but never allocated by the state. And we went to bat last year and we basically said these are health and safety concerns. We're not talking about expanding Gamble Pavilion to fit another 10,000 people. Okay, I love UConn. I love UConn women's basketball, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the roof at Naugatuck Valley. We're talking about flooding at Western. We are talking about an athletics facilities for our outstanding D3 athletes at Eastern, some of whom are in the same lockers, on the same benches, touching the same walls and the same wood floors that their parents touched and played on a generation ago. So again, talk about what it is that we need for health and safety, but also what our students deserve. Sorry to get on my soapbox. I get fired up about this. We need the board's help. We need the legislature's help. We need everyone to be on the same page that $335 million of approved but never allocated funds has a massive detrimental impact on our system. And it's something that we have to be vocal about. And so you just got a preview. I plan on being very vocal about this because it's something that our system desperately needs. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I believe that's it, Committee Chair Balducci.
I would just also mention, and this is kind of tongue in cheek, there's a $20 million pot of money sitting out there that quote unquote we're supposed to potentially get this month. Haven't heard anything more about it. Don't know if we ever will. Back when it originally was mentioned, I think it was in June, Mr. Chairman, that we are potentially having access to that, which of course we could use those monies for a whole host of different things. But whether that ever comes about, we'll have to wait to see as the end of the year approaches. With that, are there any other comments on this that Lloyd needs to answer, or that I can, or the chair, or anybody else? If not,
Just thanks to you, Lloyd and team, for putting this together. This is good.
we're good?
Yeah, one question.
Go.
How do we share this with the greater community? Is this something that just gets sent out to the board after we approve the schedule? Is that?
You're not really approving the schedule. This is more an internal working product for me and my staff so that we can stay on top of the timelines and working with you. But I'm happy to share this calendar with all members of the board to get a sense of that pace.
Yeah, I think it's fair to go to the board, obviously, the ex officios, the greater board, and also the institution presidents, because they should see what they're going to be accountable to be part of, because their dates, come before these dates. So yeah, everybody on the same, I always say everyone on the same page of music, but it's not just important to be on the same page, it's to play at the right times.
So what I will do is send this out to all that you
Yeah.
referred to,
Yeah.
which is our entire community.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there's feedback, we'll certainly incorporate it.
And I think it's, this builds good culture of transparency and collaboration.
Amen.
And it's the transparency, which is an issue in the past. And I think we're stepping forward with this as we progress. So I think that's a good idea. Any other?
CFO Blanchard and Committee Chair Balducci, I can certainly include this document in the next edition of the board administrative update that we send out every 2 weeks. And that way, as long as we mark it with an effective date, we'll be able to tweak it and move it forward and keep it as a living, breathing document. We can certainly do that.
I don't mind if you share it with, Senate presidents or other people that really are in leadership positions, because people need to understand how we intend to operate and why we're operating this way. So to me, this is a very public document that creates predictability.
We can do that, sir.
Thank
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Other comments? If not, we'll move on to the action items we have before us. We actually have 3 items. One is really an information item. We talked about not raising tuition, et cetera, which we are adhering to. However, there are a couple of things where we will need to do something. One of them is the food service programs at the universities that we have. There's nothing we can do to stop the increase in costs. Some of them are going up several $100s per student. And so I think we ought to move in that direction, take care of that. And the other deals with the credit card issue for CT State. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Blanchard to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you are right. We are going to address 3 items. 2 will be up for a vote, and 1 will simply be informational. And to the extent that you wanted to express your opinion on that informational item, I'm sure it would be welcomed by the students. The first item, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, is for food service fees. We fully recognize that the board is loath to raise tuition and fees because we want to make sure that our goal of affordability is something we follow starting right away. Yet some of our contractual items escalate costs automatically by contract. And we want to try to make sure that where that is true, we give our institutions a chance to cover those costs. And starting with food service fees, you'll see in your staff report, Regents, the current food service fees for FY25. We are proposing to increase those food service fees for the following fiscal year in FY26 by 3.5% for Central Connecticut State University, by 2.9% for Eastern Connecticut State University, by 5.6% for Western Connecticut State University, and 3.9% for Southern Connecticut State University. These are all different contracts that escalate at different rates. These escalations are designed strictly to cover the increased costs by contract. You will see in the staff report also that the graphs that you'll see, the first graph, the line chart, shows the contract costs and how they are increasing, which is why we are coming to you here today. But that bottom graph that shows the revenues against expenditures graph shows that it is not true in all cases that our revenues are covering all of our costs. And we'd like to work over time to make sure that with regard to our food service costs, that those costs are covered by the fees we charge. We don't want to do that in one fell swoop. That would be an aggressive move, but we want to do it in a modest way. And that's why we are proposing the increases we are proposing today.
Just an addendum to that, it's also very difficult to get companies, food service companies, to bid on contracts for this. It isn't like you go out there and there are 4 or 5 or 6 of them fighting to be Central's food service company or Western's, et cetera. So this is something that we have to take in stride, something that has to be done, and it is contractual, as Dr. Blanchard just mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, our credit card service fees.
Why don't we vote on them individually?
Well, so
They're
you're
all
going
part of the
to
same.
vote on
Yeah.
the schedule.
Guys, right,
You're basically voting on a revised schedule
right.
one time. So I'm basically saying what the changes are to that
Got it.
schedule from the current
Right.
schedule to next year's.
Got it.
So the second item that we are proposing a change in the schedule for is the Connecticut State Community College credit card service fees. You may know, Mr. Chair, that the state pursuant to sections 438, 441 in the Public Act 21-2 required the state agencies and constituent units of higher education to charge a fee for credit card fees and debit card fees that the banks charge us for every transaction. And then, of course, the Secretary of OPM had the ability to waive such fees, and the Secretary implemented that ability, and that ability will expire in June of 25. So we are proposing that we allow, just as we have allowed the universities to cover their credit card fees, that we allow CT State to do the same. And you'll see in your staff report the amount of fees, the amount of dollars, the amount of charges these fees would cover. CT State eats anywhere from $700,000 to $800,000 a year in costs because of these fees. And since the waiver was implemented in 2022, they have absorbed over $3 million of these charges. We would like to give them the ability to charge fees to cover these costs. If not starting in the fall, as we are proposing here today, CT State would like to impress upon you the importance of starting in the spring of 25, which is next month. If you would like to do that for CT State, the impact would be about $400,000, meaning they would be able to cover about $400,000 of their annual charges. In other words, $400,000 in the fall, $400,000 in the spring. If we allow them to begin these fees in the spring, then that will be $400,000 less that they will have to eat. But that will require an amendment of the resolution. Okay, so if you want to vote the resolution as is, it would be for the food service fees and the credit card fees for CT State starting in the fall. If you would like to give CT State the ability to start those credit card fees in the spring, we would need to amend the resolution for that one item to start in the spring.
And Professor Cunningham?
Yes, I just want to, I feel an obligation as we discuss food on our campuses to point out that a lot of our students experience food insecurity. I know that at least 3 campuses, we operate food pantries for our students. And as we talk about increasing fees, which clearly increases food insecurity, I want to ask people when we negotiate with these contractors to just keep in mind that we're starting from a position in which we have students with demonstrated food insecurity. We are operating food pantries in one of the most affluent states in the United States. I know this because during our own audit for AAUP, our auditor asked about certain items that our union had purchased. And when I followed up on that, it was because our union bought those items in this holiday season to donate to a food pantry. So we need to be realistic about what's happening on our campuses. And we, you know, at minimum, we have to do things to support these pantries for students in need. I will also mention that I believe the food pantry at Western flooded with sewage recently, to follow up on Chancellor Chang's remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Balducci, I have a comment. I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't see anybody. I'm on my phone now.
I'm sorry.
Ted wants to talk.
Ted, yes, I'm sorry. Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, apologies. I had to switch to my phone, so I apologize. I can't see if anyone else had their hand up. But a couple things. So one is echoing Dr. Cunningham. I completely agree. You know, I'm making my tour around the CT State campuses again right now, and it is absolutely appalling that we don't have uniformity of services, given the need is so great for our students. This is something regarding food insecurity that I think is a huge problem. Obviously, if our state is going so far as to provide free education, we should be going so far as to make sure students are fed within our walls and able to learn, ready to learn. However, I think this is something that we need to tackle more systemically and also tackle with nonprofit dollars. This is some work that I have done in prior. Something that I think we need to do in that regard. When it comes to these fees, unfortunately, we all know the costs have gone up. I do think also in this regard, we could be more systemic, and we should be more systemic with how we are putting various contracts out to bid to the Sodexos and the Aramarks of the world and the local contractors. Again, visiting campuses, there is a very large variance, and in certain cases, we have campuses that can't get any money, and in other cases, we have campuses that are paying money, and in certain circumstances, we have campuses that are actually able to make money off of their food, and we should be looking at this systemically to make sure that this is something that we're making fair for all of our students. With regards towards that amendment that was alluded to, I would move to make that amendment if the time is appropriate or when the time is appropriate. Chair.
And I would second that amendment for the spring as opposed to the fall. Before you comment, and I see your hand up, Charlene, but I just let Dr. Blanchard want to make a comment.
Get the Chancellor first. Yes, in response to, thank you, Regent Yang, for your comments. I just wanted to say, just for clarity, when a student at one of our universities pays a food service fee, or let me back up. When a student at one of our universities chooses to live in a residence hall on campus, they are required to pay the food service fee. A student has a choice whether they want to live on campus or not. Often, if students do not choose to live on campus, they do not pay these food service fees, and they pay for food the way they would normally pay for food, even if it means engaging with our pantries.
Charlene, and then the Chancellor.
Thank you so much. I had provided information to both UConn and CSU that I had received from Department of Social Services in hopes of being able to do some outreach to your students to ensure that if they were eligible for SNAP benefits, that students were made aware of that benefit. There's a national issue across the country where students aren't leveraging benefits that could help in addressing food insecurity. So I can share this information again, and you know, I haven't heard it back, but I'm optimistic that each of the institutions are sharing this information with students that deeply need it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Boyd, you wanted to comment on?
No comment in response. We did receive that information under Secretary Castillo, so thank you.
I have one question, and this is probably an unsophisticated question, so forgive me if you agree. You stated that there's going to be a credit card fee at CT State that hasn't been in place. We're going to put it in place. All the other institutions have it, so that makes sense to me. And if we put it in earlier in the year, it's going to be a $400,000 net increase because it's probably an $800,000 annual get.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So is it $400,000 divided by 40,000 people at $10 a person? What's the per unit event that we're managing to here?
I'm going to ask CFO Terry Kelly to chime in on your question, Mr. Chair. I will say that the rate of increase is 2.95% on the transaction.
Right. What's that dollar amount to somebody on average?
That's where I'm going to ask CFO Terry Kelly to answer. CFO Kelly?
Good morning, everyone. It really depends on the base of what is being charged, and we would be charging this on a variety of things, daycare charges, parking fines. But if you were to think about it from a perspective of a student who were full-time, who paid the entire semester on a credit card, that would be about $73.
Okay, so $73 is the max.
For a full-time semester.
So $73 would be the goalpost max. And then the minimum could be as low as $5 if somebody's just putting some services on there.
Correct, if it's a parking fine or something like that.
Okay, that's helpful for me.
Other comments before we vote?
Truly has her hand up.
Mr. Chair, just one other comment. I know that in prior sessions I've indicated my dislike of fees. I think that these fees are necessary, and so they don't fall into that category. I just want to point out one thing, which I had already mentioned to CFO Blanchard and some others, which is that what I think we should all be aware of, and I think we should put together a systemic effort to work against our junk and surprise fees, especially given the student body that we're serving, people from disadvantaged backgrounds without first gen, not a lot of means. Junk and surprise fees can be devastating to people who suddenly realize that they may not be able to afford that next semester. And I think we need to do more to work on those. These fees don't fall in that category. I just want to be clear about that, which is why I support this and what's going on today. But also, one further elaboration, which is that when we do create new programs, and some new programs have come back, and I've heard that they've been told that, no, you can't put new fees into new programs. I don't think that makes any sense. I think, there are obviously costs associated with, say, labs or things that require trips or transportation or classes, et cetera, and that any new program should factor in what is necessary for us to operate those classes effectively and in a revenue generating way. Thank you.
Okay, and keep in mind also, Ted, we have an amendment we're going to have to vote on prior to voting on the resolution. Charlene, did you want to make another comment or?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. My hand was up from the prior question.
Okay. Pam?
I believe the Chancellor had his raised and then lowered it.
No, the Chancellor doesn't have his.
Yeah, I lowered it. Thank you.
Okay. Committee Chair Balducci, CFO Blanchard, point of order.
What's your point?
In last year's resolution approving the tuition and fee schedule, the last statement of the resolved of the resolution states, and I'll quote it for the record, that the board grants the CSCU Chancellor the authority to make any necessary adjustments to the fiscal year 2025 tuition and fees rates and schedules as approved herein, provided that such adjustments shall not significantly increase the overall cost of tuition and mandatory fees as set by the board, ensuring that the overall financial burden on students remains limited. Any such adjustments shall be promptly reported to the Board Finance and Infrastructure Committee for review. I propose that this early beginning of the charge for the credit card fees falls under this resolve statement from last year's resolution, and we will not need an amendment to the schedule for fiscal year 2026 tuition and fees.
Your point of order is well taken. Thank you for that, Pam. You save us having to take a separate vote on that. Thank you for that. Other comments before we vote on those two issues, the food service and the credit card issue? If not, I'm sorry?
This is for the credit card. You want to specify that?
Oh, yeah, for this credit card. Yeah, we're specifying for the credit card move to the spring. And we're also going to look at voting on the food services issue. So I would make a motion that we move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you.
Just for clarity, when you say we move it to vote?
Yes.
And the vote in our mind is to approve the proposed.
To approve the proposed increases in the food services fees for the universities starting in the fall of 25.
Yep.
And to approve the credit card fees for CT State starting in spring 25.
Right.
Because she clarified that, she meaning Pam clarified that for us.
Yep.
Okay, so motion made and seconded on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. The resolution is adopted. Thank you. Furthermore, we have one other item that we just wanted to bring forward dealing with the student fees.
That's correct. And in general, Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The students typically have control over their own funds for their own student activities. And so the way we typically do this, and this is common throughout higher education in the United States, is the students have control over their own activity fees. They often want your blessing for them to do what they wish to do. And what they seek to do this time around are two things. One, raise the residential social fee by a small amount. I believe it's $4 per year, $4 on top of 40. So it'd go from 40 to 44. And then for the transportation fee, students at Eastern Connecticut State University want to participate in the UPass program where other of our students participate and want to vote themselves into that program, $40 fee to ride the UPass bus throughout the state.
Right. And Eastern had passed on that previously, and what they're looking to do is be included in it
To be
now.
included in the program.
Right.
So that is merely informational. If you wanted to express your support for that, that is up to you, but it's merely informational.
No, I think it's a good idea that we include Eastern, is now that they feel that they have bus service to areas that they have not had before. It's a positive thing, and that the students wisely, feel that a $4 increase is necessary. It's, $4 is, you could say, is nothing. It is something to many people, but it's certainly minimal and something that's necessary to carry on in the direction that they are headed in control of their fees. So with that, last item, we do not have any to take a vote on that. That concludes, unless we have any other comments, Mr. Chairman.
I have one comment as a point of privilege. I would ask the Chancellor to, on the basis of this discussion, to look into the food pantry, food insecurity, cost issues, and come back to us in a meeting or two. I'll give you the benefit of pulling that together, but I'd like this committee and the greater board to get an assessment of these issues in the field. And I think Professor Cunningham, brought this up, and then Regent Cassiamento spoke about benefits we may not be using, and Regent Yang talked about it. And I think it's a fair enough point that as a leadership team that we need to get closer to and have a strategy where we maximize benefits for students that we may not be taking, but really to get a good understanding of how do we help people help themselves and get through these programs successfully. So maybe I'm gonna just say in 45, 60 days, Terrence, come back to us with a perspective on it. And then, that'll inform us if we need to act or we're comfortable how the system is acting.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Received and will do.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments before we move to adjourn?
Appreciate the transparency of the 2025.
It's going to be fun.
I don't know if it'll be fun, but
It's going to be fun.
Yes, it's always, especially when you're dealing with dollars and in connection with the legislature, it's always fun.
Oh, amen.
With that, hearing no other comments necessary, I would move if we adjourn the committee meeting. Is there a second?
There is.
I hear you loud and clear. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much. And a good holiday to everyone out there. I think we're all looking forward to that. So
Thank you.
Your,
thank you.
your live stream has stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Brendan.
Okay.